Hello and welcome back to Vintage Wine and Port. Today we're going to be exploring how to store and serve your bottles of port. Now, whether you're investing in thousands of pounds of wine or you're a rank beginner, some principles are same across the board. Particularly, keep your port out of sunlight. Whether it's vintage or tawny, direct sunlight is not good for the wine. So keep it in a dark place and have consistent temperatures. That's the second principle, which is very important for both tawny and vintage. You want to keep them at about 15 degrees Celsius, maybe a couple of degrees either side, but no fluctuation. That is the important thing. You want to keep it at a constant temperature, because if there's lots of fluctuation, you can really start to damage your wine. Now, to get into the differences, we'll start with vintage port. Now, vintage port has a very traditional cork. This is from our Taylor's 1955 that we tried earlier in the week. You can watch the review now on YouTube. Now, this cork is important in storing it because vintage port needs to be kept on its side so that the port in the bottle always keeps in contact with the cork. This will keep the cork moist, it doesn't dry out then, and let any air in, because if air comes into the bottle, you're going to start to cause problems with vintage port. So that's why the cork is like this. You've got to keep on its side. And the other thing we're keeping on its side is that means that all the sediment over the years forms on the side of the bottle. So before you go to serve your port, you want to stand it upright for about 3 to 5 days so that sediment falls to the bottom of the bottle, which makes it easier to decant and much easier to enjoy quickly without so much fuss. Now, when it comes to decanting, you do want to, once you've opened the bottle, let it breathe for a bit. Depending on the wine, you might want to let it breathe for several hours, or it could be ready much sooner. You really have to do your research depending on the individual bottle, but it does need some sort of filtering as well. So we have port funnels here, which means you can get into the decanter easier because it's a funnel, and there's also a kind of a strainer at the bottom, which means that the port can go through, but it doesn't let any sediment through. It's a very fine strainer, but you can do this with any strainer you have at home, any sort of sieve or cloth that has that's porous, just so you can get the port through, which is the important thing, obviously, that you want to drink, but keep the sediment out. And the sediment's never a bad thing, you know, it happens naturally with every port, but you don't want to be drinking it. So that's an important principle. You want to serve it around room temperature. That's normally pretty good, although if it is a very hot day, you might want to chill it for about 20 minutes before serving, just so it is a bit cooler, maybe about 16 degrees Celsius, and then you can really enjoy it. Now, when it comes to Tawny Port, it's a much simpler process. It's a much less fussy type of port. It doesn't need decanting, it doesn't need filtering, but it does need storing and serving slightly differently. So Tawny Ports have a very different type of stopper, this kind of mushroom cap, and this is because the port is ready to drink straight away. Once the Tawny Port's been produced, it's immediately drinkable, and it will kind of keep that consistent level of quality throughout the years. It may lose some freshness the older it gets, but basically it's ready to roll out. So it's got this type of cork. And this also means that you can revisit it as well. Vintage port needs to be drunk within a couple of days of opening, 48 hours ideally, whereas Tawny Port can last for several weeks once it's opened. So you've got this stopper cork, so you can open and close the bottle across a period of time. But for this reason, it needs to be kept upright because obviously this isn't as secure as having a regular cork. So if you keep it on its side, it's more prone to leakage and stuff like that. So keep it upright. In fact, you may see some of our Tawny Ports come in tubes like this, so they can only be stood upright. Yeah, you're not gonna see a vintage port in this because obviously it's much better to keep on its side, and you'll be rolling all over the place. You'll be chasing your port. You don't want that. So yes, you're going to keep your Tawny Port upright. When it comes to serving it, it probably is better to be a little bit chilled, probably about 11 degrees Celsius, between 10 and 12 basically. That basically brings out the more caramelly, nutty flavours and aromas and dulls down slightly the alcohol from the fermentation process. So a much sweeter, more enjoyable drink if you do it like that. The other thing to note with Tawny Ports is as they age over the years, occasionally you might see some haziness, some haze in a bottle of Kalita, for example, but that doesn't affect the quality of wine. That's not a marker of anything going wrong. That just happens naturally as some Tawny Ports age. You may look at it and think, what's going on here? It's perfectly fine, it's perfectly drinkable, and it will still be as good a quality as when it first rolled out of the beautiful Douro Valley. So there you go, that's how you store vintage and Tawny Ports. Now you may be thinking, why do I have to store them differently? What's the difference? We have the video for you. We did a video all about the difference between vintage and Tawny Ports, how they're made and how they're kept, and you can go check that out on our YouTube channel. The link will be in the description below. They'll probably pop up somewhere on the screen in a minute. And the other thing to look forward to is we are going to be doing videos on food pairings for all types of port and some port cocktails. When we get closer to the summer, we're going to be talking about some exciting port cocktails that you can try at home, particularly because Tawny Port is a very good summer drink because it's slightly cooler, much more enjoyable summer veranda drink, if you know what I mean. Vintage port, perhaps more of a winter delicacy, but enjoyed all year round as well. Thank you for joining us. Please do like, subscribe, and if you have any questions, comment them down below. We'll do our best to make a video especially for you. As for now, take care and see you in the next one.